Today I'm going to be describing an outlook of how to build a proper modern NBA championship roster and using the past 5 years as a blueprint for how to build it. Then I'm going to be going over a few teams that fit that model and a few teams that aren't quite there but are close to that. So let's first start off with the archetypes of what we're looking for. Alright, so let's start off with the shot creating playmaker. We're looking for the type of players that can be leaders on an offense, whether that be through their shooting or playmaking, but we really want that combination of both, where they get everyone involved, but they can also get their own shot. So we're not just looking for someone like Rondo who can playmake for people. We're looking for people who can be probably around 20-point scorers while also getting around 6-7 assists, those types of guys. And the position doesn't really matter as long as they're the type of people that can get everyone involved as well as creating their own shot. A lot of the times this will be the best player on your team, but it's not necessarily going to be. And historically, an example of not necessarily being the best player is someone like Tony Parker, but they also could be the best, like Larry Bird. Next up, we have the elite shot maker. These are very similar players to the first archetype. However, they're much more of a star offensively. They're normally the best player on the team, and normally this guy is around top 10, 15 ball player in the league right now. It's someone you can really reliably give the ball to in the last possession of the game and get you a shot, and this especially matters during the playoffs when defenses are tightening, so that's why these people need to not be super free throw reliant. So my historical examples for that are Michael Jordan and Paul Pierce, as two different levels of the same archetype. Next up, we have 3 above average 3-and-D role players. So we're at the point in the league where matchup hunting is super key and spacing is super important. So we can't really have weak links in our roster, and we've seen superstar trios fail because they basically didn't have enough around them. We're talking about like the recent Lakers trio of Westbrook, AD, LeBron. We've seen that all those guys still are pretty good, but you can't do it without people around you. So these guys are basically the dirty work role players. They'll space the floor, allow the stars to act as the centerpieces of the offense. And although they're often thought of as guards and forwards, they can be big men. So I would also say off-ball scoring is very key to this, so some historical examples of that are going to be Shane Battier, Robert Horry, and Trevor Ariza. The next archetype is going to be multiple defensive bigs. These guys are really the anchors of the defense. They can work as either pure rim protectors or in the more roaming role we see these days. The reason these guys are necessary is because it limits the easiest and most productive shots in the game, because layups and dunks will almost always be the highest efficiency shots. And teams often struggle in the playoffs without multiple defensive bigs because they're just not going to be able to keep up offensively with teams that do have those. And normally one is going to need to be borderline elite. Not all of them need to be, but at least one. And you need at least one switchable big as well. And 2 types of players historically would be Tyson Chandler and Dennis Rodman. And the final archetype is going to be a 6th man. Normally they're a creator. They don't always have to be, but normally they are. They might not complement the star player as well, so they'll kind of take over the offense when the star player sits out. They can have some plays run through them, and they kind of keep the team above water while the stars are sitting. So some historical examples of this are Manu Ginobili and Tony Kukoc. These are guys that could have been starting for other teams, but they chose to take this role to be more important to winning. So now let's look at these previous 5 champions and see who fits these bills for these teams. And just so y'all know, some players will fall into multiple categories, and we're just going to go off into a brief reason as to why they fit these. Alright, let's start off with the 2018-2019 Raptors. So their shot creating playmaker was Kyle Lowry, and if y'all forget, this was back when Kyle Lowry was that guy. He averaged over 6.5 assists and a little over 2 turnovers, giving him a decent playmaking role. He was also a great shot maker, and he got to the free throw line over 3 times a game, so he was a pretty good shot creating playmaker. This is a lower tier guy, but he was really good. And we all know who the elite shot maker was on this team. It's Kawhi Leonard. This dude was absolutely crazy. 30 points on 62% true shooting is just absolute insanity. No matter where he was taking it, it looked like it was going in. This playoff run was incredible by Leonard. So their 3-and-D role players were Danny Green, Marc Gasol, and Norman Powell. all are well-known NBA vets at this point, and Gasol shot 38% from downtown on 4 attempts a game, which is pretty good during this run. And these guys all gave good defensive effort and energy during this time, especially Powell and Green, to let Leonard rest a bit by taking the stronger assignments on defense. Their multiple defensive bigs were Gasol, Ibaka, and Siakam. All of them were good, but at different things. Because Pascal moved his feet really well. He was more of that switchable big. Gasol was more of a traditional paint big man at this point. It was really good against Embiid in the post. And then Ibaka was pretty good at that roaming role where he would sort of just come out of nowhere to block shots. The sixth man for this team was Serge Ibaka and Van Vliet. While Van Vliet was more of a traditional creator, Serge also was really good providing some offensive help as a big man, especially in the pick and roll off the bench. And Van Vliet was able to step into Lowry's role and kind of provide some instant offense during this run. Overall, this was a really well-built team and had all the necessary tools according to this model to win a championship. But if you kind of look at their opponent, the Warriors had enough players to fall under these categories as well, but ultimately the Raptors just had that injury luck. Next, let's talk about the 2019-2020 Los Angeles Lakers. So starting off with their shot-creating playmaker, this is, of course, LeBron James. This is probably LeBron's best playmaking postseason. He averaged about 9 assists and had an assist percentage of 42%, which is ridiculously high. And spoiler alert, he's also going to be the elite shot maker. So let's get into that with both him and AD, because both of them had ridiculously great shot making postseasons, as LeBron seemed unstoppable in the post and was finishing really, really well alongside with 37% from deep, and AD actually bettered him and shot 38% from deep and was elite in both the roll and pop game. So either one of these guys were both elite shot makers at this point. For their 3-and-D role players, we have Caruso, KCP, Danny Green, and Markieff Morris. These guys were a little bit inconsistent, and probably KCP was the most consistent. All of these guys contributed to this role. Morris shot an underrated 42% from 3, and Caruso's defense and effort were really, really solid for them when they needed it. Danny Green also exists, so he's there. For their multiple defensive bigs, we have AD, JaVale McGee, and Dwight Howard. AD was an arguable DPOY candidate during this season, and JaVale and Dwight both had excellent defensive seasons. Howard in the playoffs had lost some weight and was moving his feet excellently when Davis sat, and McGee was of course a pretty standard rim protector, but very solid to have as just a backup big. For their sixth man, they actually kind of had two, because both Kyle Kuzma and Rajon Rondo were really, really good for them. Kuzma scored a solid 10 off the bench on decent shooting as a spark plug, which is exactly what they needed in a form of instant offense, while Rondo was contributing with 9 points and 6 assists, which is some very solid bench creation. 6 assists off the bench is no joke. And this team was just really defensively dominant, and they attacked the rim relentlessly, which is what really set them apart. So while people might say Mickey Mouse ring, this was a legitimately good championship with a well-built team. Next up, let's talk about the 2020 to 2021 Milwaukee Bucks. Their shot-creating playmaker was Drew Holiday, who had a really underrated playmaking postseason this year as he averaged over 8.5 assists, as well as scoring 17 points per game. Their elite shot maker was the combination of Chris Middleton and Giannis. Neither of them are really traditional elite shot makers, but I think the combination of the two really filled that hole for them. Giannis would dominate most of the game in the paint, but in the clutch, when you need that quick basket, Middleton was the one who was relied upon for this. So it's a little bit unconventional, but I would consider the combination of the two to fill the role. Their 3-and-D role players were PJ Tucker, Bobby Portis, Pat Connaughton, and Brook Lopez. All these guys were super important when it came to keeping the Bucks' defensive mentality, as well as spacing the floor for Giannis. None of them shot particularly well from 3, but the defense was what made this Bucks team special. Speaking of, their multiple defensive bigs were Giannis, Portis, Lopez, and Tucker. This defensive big rotation is just absolutely crazy. All these guys were at least above average defenders, with Tucker, Lopez, and Giannis being elite at this point. The versatility between a traditional rim protector in Lopez, a roamer in Giannis, as well as a super switchable guy in Tucker was just fantastic. Their sixth men were both Bobby Portis and Pat Connaughton. Both of these guys had a little bit of a scoring role off the bench, with Portis being especially productive given the limited minutes he had. This team may not have been as traditional as others, but they just fit really well together, with some people's strengths being other shortcomings. Their combination of physical defense as well as switchability was just really special, and the whole team kind of came together around Giannis's dominance during this run and gave him the support he needed to show his true superstardom. Alright, let's talk about the 2021-2022 Golden State Warriors now. Their shot-creating playmaker was of course Steph Curry, but a little bit of help from Draymond Green, because Green actually led the team in assists with 7, but let's be real here, Steph was the one creating nearly everything for this team. A lot is made of his gravity, and it was shown during this run. The elite shot maker is of course Steph Curry again, and he's one of the most efficient scorers of all time, and he showed up big during this playoff run. He shot over 10 threes a game, on 40% shooting, which is just legendary. And his range and floater game during this run were just gorgeous and insanely efficient. The 3-and-D role players for these guys were Otto Porter Jr., Gary Payton II, Andrew Wiggins, and Klay Thompson. You could argue that Wiggins and Thompson were near star level, but they really played more like role players at this point, with Wiggins occasionally taking over the offense, but for the most part it was about spacing for Steph. These guys were all varying levels of 3-and-D though, with Payton and Wiggins bringing more elite defense while Porter and Thompson obviously brought more 3-point shooting. Combined, they all make like an elite mob of versatile, very switchable 3-and-D guys, with Porter even getting some center minutes, which was huge for their offense. For their defensive bigs, we have Looney and Draymond. Both of these guys have anchored the Warriors' defense for years. This remains the case during this run. We saw the classic Draymond switching on everything and being physical and all those shenanigans, while Looney remains the anchor, a great drop defender in the pick and roll, and was able to help deter some good bigs in the playoffs like Jokic, Jaren Jackson Jr., and Horford. And finally, their sixth man was Jordan Poole. There is a reason this man got paid so much, and it was this playoff run. Jordan Poole was a 17-point per game scorer on 67% true shooting. That is insanely efficient. To show how much better he was during these playoffs, in this year's playoffs, he had 10 points per game on 45% true shooting. People may call him trash now, but for this championship run, Poole was on a tear. Steph Curry, though, was just ridiculous this run, as everything was built around him and the spacing he creates for others. When you look at a lot of the Golden State role players on other teams, they end up not doing as well, and that is due to the ease at which Steph allows his teammates to score. This was an elite team built around a superstar having an amazing playoffs. Alright, next up we have our 2022-2023 Denver Nuggets, our most recent champions. Our shot-creating playmakers for this team are both Jokic and Murray. In these playoffs, both of them were on fire when it came to these two attributes, with Murray's 26-7 and Jokic's 30-9.5. People may underrate Murray's playmaking, but he actually averaged the most assists in the finals this year. For the elite shot makers, we have once again Jokic and Murray. Jokic's 30 on 63% true shooting is insane, and anyone who accused him of not being that guy should just be silenced this year with the ridiculous amount of difficult shots he hit when the Nuggets needed it most. Murray also had a crazy 26 on 59% true shooting, and I think the difficulty of shots he's taking deserves him being called an elite shot maker. We may need to see more from him to keep this label, but between the bubble and this playoff run, Murray has just been an amazing playoff elevator. For our 3-and-D role players, we have Gordon, KCP, Porter Jr., and Bruce Brown. Gordon and KCP are just elite for their roles. I mean, they're just high-quality starters who provide both spacing and just a great defense, especially Gordon when it comes to the defensive side. And then Porter Jr., I think, served really well when it came to defense. I think he started out the league in a poor defensive manner, but he's actually gotten better recently. And while his three-point wasn't really there for the finals, it was there in earlier rounds, and he was really important when it came to spacing. Finally, Bruce Brown's defense was amazing, and while he's not a great floor spacer, his cuts are really, really important, and that still provides spacing even if it's not from shooting directly. For their multiple defensive bigs, we have both Jokic and Gordon. While Jokic is kind of lazy in the regular season and he coasts a bit, when it came to the playoffs, he finally locked in and was pretty good on the defensive side. He averaged a block a game, and he made opponents shoot under 40% at the rim when he was the primary defender in the finals. So while he may slack in the regular season, he is pretty damn good when he actually tries. Gordon, on the other hand, was one of the most switchable guys throughout the entire season for them, guarding near 1 to 5 because he's strong and he moves his feet really well. Finally, the sixth man Bruce Brown and Christian Brown at times later during the playoff run, but mostly Bruce. Bruce Brown's 12 off the bench were just awesome for them, especially his cutting when the Nuggets weren't shooting that well. Christian Brown was also important at this time during this run, but it wasn't as consistent as Bruce Brown. Regardless, Denver's bench was not super deep, but they had just enough guys to get it done. This playoff run is just incredible shot making and playmaking between Jokic and Murray, and I really hope to see more from them in the future. Alright, so now let's look at some teams in 2023 that might be able to fit these specifications. So I'm just going to go through a few that fit and give them a contender rating 1 through 5, 1 being more of a dark horse and 5 being more of a damn near guaranteed championship. So to start is the Denver Nuggets. This is obvious. They just won the championship and are able to retain nearly all their players except for Bruce Brown. But if Christian Brown can replace him, or if Peyton Watson can progress, I see their bench still being enough for them. So I'm going to give them a contender rating of a 4.5 out of 5 because their bench might need some work, but they're still obvious contender. Next up, we have the Boston Celtics. They were really good last year, and they might have even made the finals had injuries not prevented that. But of course, that's pretty circumstantial. So I think I'm going to give them a contender rating of 4.0 out of 5 just because their defense can be a little bit questionable with Smart gone. They need to find that identity again. They need to get that chemistry together. But I really like the Porzingis addition, and I think it gives them a lot more options offensively. Next up, we have the Milwaukee Bucks. The Bucks defense hasn't really decreased much in recent years, and Lopez even had a bit of a resurgence last year. So I'm going to give them a 3.5 to 4, depending on how Chris Middleton recovers and their age, because they're very old. I could either see them bounce back and become an elite contender, or somewhat fall down because their guys are finally getting up there. So I just kind of want to see with them. Next up, we have the Los Angeles Lakers. The Lakers made an unexpected Western Conference final run after a rough start to the season. So can they continue this? I give them a rating of about 2.5 out of 5. I see them making some noise, but it depends on free agency and who they bring back. If Reeves and Rui walk, their role players are really questionable. In addition, LeBron and AD are both not getting any younger, and they still rely a lot on those guys to be good. Alright, this next one's way more of a projection than other ones, but the Atlanta Hawks. If the Hawks get another year of better chemistry, I could see them being a strong playoff competitor. I would give them a contender rating about a 1.5 out of 5. I think this takes some speculation, but I think they're a very good young team, and if those young players can take some jumps and their chemistry can improve, they could be a legitimate dark horse candidate. And our final pick is going to be the Minnesota Timberwolves. This is once again a lot of speculation, but we only saw their big three together for 30 games, and I really want to see a full season of Cat, Edwards, and Gobert, so I'm going to give them a contender rating of 1.5 out of 5. Once again, I think this is more of a speculation pick, but if Edwards and Cat can continue to develop, because Cat should be entering his prime now, he's only 27, and Edwards has just gotten better every year, I think they could really make some impact in the playoffs if they do progress. Alright, so now let's talk about some teams that I think are close, but they're not quite there to me. The Warriors, their 3-and-D is kind of crappy, their bench is weak, and they're in cap space hell. If Draymond walks, it's really not going to be enough defensively to just have Looney then. The Mavericks, really just terrible defense. They need more 3-and-D and defensive bigs, and they just don't have that. The Knicks, I don't see any of the mid-3 as elite shot makers, so they really need some improvement from there, or they're not going to be true contenders. I think the Cavs, they have 3 guys and they have D guys, but they don't have 3-and-D guys, which kind of is a problem for them. The Grizzlies, I think the Grizzlies would actually be a dark horse, but without Ja for 25 games, their future's a bit tumultuous. So if you have them on here, I think that's definitely fair, but I want to see more out of their role players, as a lot of young guys on their roster are still unproven, as Zaire Williams and Santi Aldama are okay, but I want to see more out of them. And they just lost 2 important pieces in Tyus Jones and Dillon Brooks, and I want to see Marcus Smart's fit there. For the Thunder, I think they have nearly all the pieces, but they're not quite there yet. They obviously need to progress, and I want to see their defensive bigs get better, because I want to see Holmgren play and see if he can be that roaming role. The Suns, I think this is controversial, but I don't believe they have enough role players to genuinely be good. It really depends on what they do in free agency, but you can't rely on just 4 guys. It's not a 4-person team. For the Sixers, will James Harden resign? Do they have enough 3-and-D guys? I'm not sure. I guess I need to see how free agency turns out. For the Kings, I'm not sure if Fox can be a superstar. That remains to be seen. And then finally for the Clippers, injury concerns and their bigs are just not that great. So I think that might answer some of the questions you guys would have. I've now talked about probably way too many teams just due to the high parity in the league currently. We can picture a lot of teams making some good playoff runs. We just have to wait for this offseason to resolve and see how many of these teams can fill their holes, as some are only a few pieces away. Anyways, hope you enjoyed. See you.